Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. Strange music show where we take a dive into a different album each and every week, right? So in today's episode, we are returning to the wonderful sonic world of Steve Roden, with a look at a rather unusual release within his incredible discography. So this is actually a rather unusual album, both in terms of how it sounds, but even also the physical release. As an album though, it does showcase Roden's wonderful ability to just weave an entire tapestry of sounds from a singular source, creating instances of sound that are far cry away from what you would expect the object to sound like. Very cool stuff. Excited to be discussing Roden again. So today I present Ecstasy showered its petals with the full peal of the bells by Steve Roden. So, what is Ecstasy showered its petals with the full peal of its bells? Well, this is a limited release of 500 copies of a 3-inch physical CD. Sadly, with a typo on the front of it. Huge shame, but shit happens. More on that later. But yes, this is a 20-minute composition by Roden, performed entirely using one handbell. Yep, Roden's classic approach to producing unusual lowercase instances from a singular object, in this case, the bell. Roden's approach has always been to see what sounds can be pulled out of various objects, even if it's not the sounds you'd normally expect. And from just this bell, Roden creates for us this unusual, strange experimental composition that seems to be sourced from a great number of different objects, except of course it isn't. It's perhaps what makes it so oddly delightful to listen to. So to me, I think this is actually perhaps one of the more underground recordings by Roden. Now, all sorts on that singular handbell, you have a strange, unusual sound of, murmuring, drones that occur for 20 minutes. And as it opens, you get a strange sort of loop of ambient swells caught in unusual frequencies, like the moving of the bell itself, creating this low-end scraping sound, and an unusual set of frequencies coming in and out of the mix. Just as you start to get used to it all, though, it all seems to occur alongside of itself again, albeit with minor differences in the bottom left of the channel, navigating outward and further pushing the composition into that confusing set of abstraction. It's oddly enough a very unsettling little sound odyssey perhaps, one that sounds absolutely nothing like a bell, and instead shows us the abstract presentation of bells, different sounds being pulled from the source in a number of different ways. Like so much of what Roden has done, result in this unusual set of high frequencies. The result of Bell's natural chime, with this very affecting of the sound, turning resonating tones into these strange drones that rattle in your very ears, it feels. It's almost like there's this constant quavering note warbling in the centre of the air, like the slowed down of a choir of bells, just shaking of the bells in slow motion, creating these stretches of sound that come across so strange and otherworldly. But what I find fascinating is about how maybe 5 minutes in, Roden sort of starts to contrast the strange abstraction of affected tones with the literal sound of bells, just chiming away so gently alongside the swell of drones and low ends and lowercase notions. It's almost like, to me, that he's trying to pull the entire composition back into context after the opening confused us with its abstraction of bell sound. For me, it now starts to feel a little bit more tangible, at least for now, until eventually other sound occurrences start to dominate the scene. That scraping vibrational pattern that feels more like a string instrument of some kind than any other kind of bell. It's very strange, but I find it very engrossing, as you simply want to just keep listening to find out what sounds Roden will produce from the singular handbell, only for it to then hypnotise you into this stunned state of being, unable to comprehend the more subtle details when they do eventually appear, as they are so minute and quiet. I should say, to quickly mention it, one of my favourite parts is perhaps towards the end, when you get this wonderful rumbling of lowercase, the effect that sort of bubbles in the very ear of the cars, placing itself alongside the entire composition. Something about the physical effect that this particular sound has makes it so strange and delightful that when it does eventually occur, that is just so interesting, just a perfect expression of what makes lowercase music so great, that something so tiny and minute can have such an amazing physical effect sometimes. So I definitely think this is one of the more truly fascinating compositions from Roden. Unlike most of Roden's other releases, this one actually comes with very little information regarding the background of the track. Bandcamp and Roden's own website tell us very little apart from the following. Ferns Recording 2011. Tracks. 1. Ecstasy showered its petals with the peal of its bells. Sound source. A single handbell. The title is a quote from George Roden Bach's book, Bruges La Morte. So not really that much for us to go on, but I think it's kind of cool, as instead of having having all of that context we normally have with Roden's albums, this one we have to make our own inferences on. For myself, I find this release to be very evident of the strength of Roden's abilities as an experimental composer. His ability to weave together such strange lowercase ambient drones, all sourced from the most oddest of places, in this case, the bell. It represents his ability to create so much from so little. And on a lot of his albums, the sounds that create the compositions have ended up being the most strangest things sometimes. And it's in Roden's ability to pull sound out from whatever he sees fit that made him one of the most amazing composers in my books. And on Ecstasy showered its petals with the full peal of its bells, it just shows how much someone can do with one singular sound source, in this case just one singular bell. And not just making a composition of bell chimes, but instead pulling out this entire orchestra, it feels, all from the one singular object, and resulting in so many different sounds of it all. It's to me what makes Roden's work so amazing, and definitely one of the reasons why I find this one to be so fascinating. The fact that a single handbell can produce, well, this, a menagerie of sounds you never thought could exist, but with thanks to Roden's experimentation and imagination, we can experience it and be enticed by the entire experience. So, definitely a strange one. It's just like so many of Roden's compositions are, but this one, this limited run of 500 tiny little CDs, feels like such a hidden release by Roden, found only through a little bit of digging. So for me, I actually came across this one when exploring Discogs for any Steve Roden albums, and I found this and thought it was really weird and made no sense, but I thought it was kind of cool. I eventually listened to it and thought this would be worth buying though, because this is a very interesting thing, and maybe eventually we can present it on the show perhaps. And especially now diving into it for this show, although we don't know anything concrete due to a lack of background information, I do feel like I understand it a little bit better, and it feels like it works very nicely as his presentation of his core concept, sound exploration, using experimentation to see the vast range of sounds you can source from a singular object. But beyond what sound it's supposed to make though, right? I'm not sure it makes all the sense, but it's just how I feel, and I do think it's fascinating and cool, and something I'm very glad to own this physical copy of. Speaking of, I did want to go into a bit more about this physical release just before we close off, so I'm just going to squeeze it in a little bit here. But it's a very strange physical release, of course, though. I have got tiny mini 3-inch CDs before. Never been able to play any of them, but they are something I have come across, and I always found them to be a little bit of a novelty. But when you look at how tiny the CDs are, there's something just kind of cute about it, right? As it is as well, though, just how tiny this whole thing is just quite adorable. It is such a shame about the typo on the front, though. Of course, accidents do happen with these things. One example would actually be Have a Nice Life's album, The Unnatural World, where the final track, Emptiness Will Eat the Witch, sadly has a typo on the back of it as well. Sometimes we miss things when we're making stuff, but not much we can do. But at the same time, the main importance is the music itself, right? And even though it does have it, just a lovely little tiny physical release, isn't it? Very cool stuff. And so I think with that, we'll come to the end of our episode of Weird Music. Another very short one, another one for the Steve Roden playlist, but this is always one I've wanted to eventually discuss, as it remains a lovely little enigmatic mystery of sorts. A strange physical release that has a typo on the front, but what can you do, of course? Speaking of typos, even my physical release for Low Resonant has a typo in it, so there we go. But I'm so glad to have presented this one on the channel because it's such a fascinating little album, a fascinating representation of the core concept of Steve Roden's work, and just a wonderful composition as well that people may not think to go listen to. Yep, I do wonder what you're all going to make of this one. Maybe you won't find it as interesting as I have, but I want to keep discussing Steve Roden stuff, and there's a few more in the pipeline as well that we will get to eventually. But with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.